The moment Steve Harvey walked onto the Voice stage with his signature smile and impeccable suit, everyone expected pure entertainment gold. But what nobody in that studio was prepared for was witnessing one of America's most beloved TV hosts completely shatter on live television, proving that sometimes the people who inspire us the most are the ones who've survived the darkest struggles. Subscribe now because what you're about to witness will change everything you think you know about the man behind the mustache. Steve had come to The Voice that Wednesday afternoon for what was supposed to be a motivational celebrity guest segment. The producers had invited him to mentor a young contestant who had been struggling with confidence, bringing his trademark wisdom and humor to help guide someone through one of the biggest moments of their life. The plan was simple. Steve would work with 19-year-old Marcus Williams, a talented young singer from Detroit who had grown up in poverty and was fighting to make something of himself through music. Steve's job was to share some life advice, offer encouragement, and maybe tell one of his famous stories about overcoming adversity to reach success. Marcus had chosen to sing Lean on Me by Bill Withers, a song that held deep meaning for him because it represented the community support that had helped him survive a difficult childhood in one of Detroit's toughest neighborhoods. It was supposed to be an uplifting performance about hope, resilience, and the power of human connection. Steve sat in the red coach chair that had been set up for him, chatting easily with Blake Shelton about the performance they were about to witness. His energy was warm and encouraging as always, the kind of presence that had made him a father figure to millions of viewers over his decades in television. "This young man, Marcus, reminds me a lot of myself at that age," Steve said to Blake as they waited for the performance to begin. "He's got that hunger, that determination to rise above his circumstances. Sometimes all people need is someone to believe in them, someone to tell them that where they come from doesn't have to determine where they're going." Blake nodded, appreciating Steve's insight. "That's exactly what these kids need to hear. Your story is proof that dreams can come true no matter where you start." As Marcus took the stage, Steve leaned forward with genuine interest, ready to offer the kind of encouragement that had become his trademark. The young singer looked nervous but determined, understanding that this moment could change the trajectory of his entire life. Marcus began to sing, his voice rich and soulful as he delivered the opening lines. "Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on." Steve was nodding and smiling, clearly moved by Marcus's vocal ability and the emotion he was putting into every word. But as the performance continued, something began to shift in Steve's expression. His confident smile started to waver, and his hands gripped the arms of his chair as memories he'd spent decades trying to process suddenly came flooding back. The lyrics continued, "For it won't be long till I'm going to need somebody to lean on." As Marcus hit those words, Steve's carefully constructed composure began to crumble. His eyes filled with tears, and he started shaking his head as if trying to push away images that were forcing their way into his consciousness. "We all need somebody to lean on." When Marcus reached the chorus, Steve's emotional dam finally burst. Tears began streaming down his face, not gentle tears of inspiration, but the raw, uncontrolled crying of someone whose deepest wounds had been suddenly exposed. Steve stood up abruptly from his chair, his powerful frame shaking as sobs racked his body. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking in a way that millions of viewers had never heard before. "I can't, this song, it's bringing back too much." Marcus, still singing, noticed Steve's distress, and his own voice began to falter, concerned about what was happening with his mentor. Blake immediately signaled for the music to stop, understanding that something profound and unexpected was occurring. "Steve," Blake called out softly, rising from his own chair. "Talk to us, man. What's going on?" Steve was now openly weeping, his usual commanding presence completely dissolved. That song, it reminds me of when we were homeless, he managed to say through his tears. When I was 12 years old, my family lived in our car for months. We had nobody to lean on, nobody. The studio fell completely silent as everyone processed what they were witnessing. This was Steve Harvey, the man who had built an empire on hope and positivity, the host who always seemed to have the perfect words of encouragement, breaking down in front of millions of viewers. Steve, Blake said gently, approaching him slowly, tell us what happened. You don't have to carry that alone anymore. Steve looked up at Blake with eyes full of shame and pain that had clearly been buried for decades. My father lost his job when I was 12. We lost our house, lost everything. For 6 months, we lived in our beat-up Chevy, moving from parking lot to parking lot, trying to find safe places to sleep. Steve's voice broke again as he continued. I was so ashamed. I'd wake up in that back seat every morning, trying to make myself look presentable for school, praying none of my classmates would find out that I was homeless. I felt like less than nothing, like I didn't deserve to dream about anything better. Blake felt his own throat tighten with emotion as he realized the depth of Steve's buried trauma. Without hesitation, Blake walked over to Steve and pulled him into a strong, brotherly embrace. Steve, look at me, Blake said firmly but gently. That hungry little boy sleeping in the back of a car grew up to inspire millions of people. You took that pain and turned it into purpose. You've helped more families than you could ever count. Steve clung to Blake, years of suppressed shame and trauma pouring out of him. But I still feel him, Steve whispered, that scared, hungry kid who felt so worthless. Every night when I go to sleep in my mansion, part of me is still that 12-year-old boy wondering if we'll have a safe place to sleep tomorrow. Kelly Clarkson, watching from her chair, was crying openly. Steve, that little boy is the reason you fight so hard for other people. Your pain became your superpower. John Legend added, his voice thick with emotion. The fact that you remember that feeling is what makes you able to connect with people who are struggling. Your empathy comes from your experience. Marcus, still standing at the microphone, was watching the scene unfold with his own eyes full of tears. Mr. Harvey, he said quietly, I chose this song because I grew up in foster care, moving from house to house, never knowing where I'd be sleeping next week. You just showed me that it's possible to rise above that. That survival can become strength. Steve looked up at Marcus, seeing his own journey reflected in the young man's eyes. What's your story, son? How did you make it through? Music saved me, Marcus replied. Every time I felt hopeless, every time I wanted to give up, I'd sing. It reminded me that I had a voice, that I mattered, that someone might need to hear what I had to say. Steve wiped his eyes, beginning to compose himself. That's exactly right. We survive so we can help others survive. We overcome so we can show others that overcoming is possible. Blake kept his arm around Steve's shoulders. Steve, you've spent decades helping people believe in themselves. Maybe it's time you gave that scared little boy inside you the same encouragement you give everyone else. Steve took a deep breath, understanding that this moment was about more than his own healing. Marcus, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Sometimes we try so hard to move past our pain that we forget it's the source of our strength. That hunger, that fear, that desperation, it never really leaves us, but we can use it to fuel our compassion for others. Would you mind if I finished listening to your song? Steve asked Marcus. I think that little boy sleeping in the car needs to hear it. He needs to understand that someday people really will have someone to lean on, and sometimes that someone will be him. As Marcus began to sing Lean on Me again, Steve listened with new ears, hearing not just lyrics about needing support, but understanding the deeper message about becoming the support that others need. When Marcus reached the chorus this time, Steve sang along softly, his voice harmonizing with the young performers as they both honored the journey from hopelessness to hope. The performance became something transcendent, not just a song, but a shared moment of healing that reminded everyone in the studio that our deepest pain can become our greatest source of strength. When the song ended, the applause was unlike anything the voice had ever experienced. It wasn't just appreciation for a performance. It was recognition of a moment when entertainment became testimony, when celebrity became vulnerability, when success story became survival story. Steve addressed the studio with renewed strength. I came here today thinking I was going to mentor a young man. Instead, Marcus and this song reminded me that we never really leave our struggles behind. We just learn to transform them into something that can help others. Blake put his hand on Steve's shoulder. Steve, thank you for showing us that success doesn't erase pain. It just gives us a bigger platform to help others heal from theirs. The segment became one of the most watched and most shared moments in television history, proving that authenticity and vulnerability are more powerful than any polished performance. Because sometimes the people who lift us up the highest are the ones who've fallen the farthest. Sometimes the strongest voices belong to those who've known what it means to have no voice at all. And sometimes a song about leaning on each other can remind us that our greatest struggles can become our most powerful tools for helping others.